The Dralethian survey cruiser Molten Will cut through the void like a blade forged in the heart of a dying star. Its segmented hull, dark as scorched iron, pulsed with veins of molten orange energy, a testament to the brutalist efficiency of Dralethian engineering. Inside the command nexus, High Commander Dralethian observed the frozen derelict drifting ahead with the cold patience of a predator circling wounded prey. The human vessel was ancient. Its design was angular, utilitarian, a relic from an era when mankind had barely clawed its way beyond the gravity well of its homeworld. Scans revealed layers of ice clinging to its hull like a burial shroud, the remnants of a cryogenic drift spanning centuries. Vashdor, the ship's lead xenobiologist, adjusted the holographic display with a flick of his clawed fingers. "Minimal power signatures," he reported, his voice a low, grinding hum. "One life sign. Faint organic suspension protocols appear intact." Dralethian's mandibles twitched in irritation. The galactic consensus had long dismissed humanity as a footnote, a species too reckless, too emotional, too fragile to survive the unforgiving calculus of the cosmos. Yet here one lingered, preserved against time itself. "Bring it aboard," Dralethian ordered. The retrieval was swift. Magnetic clamps seized the derelict, dragging it into the Molten Will's cavernous hangar bay. Up close, the human ship was even more pitiable. Its alloy pitted by micrometeorites, its propulsion systems rusted into obsolescence. Yet something about its stubborn existence unsettled Dralethian. Vashdor's team worked with clinical precision, cutting through the cryo chambers seals with plasma torches. Steam hissed as the ancient mechanisms yielded, revealing the sleeper within, a human male. His features were locked in stillness, skin pale as lunar dust, his body clad in a tattered uniform bearing insignia long erased from galactic records. Vashdor's scanners flickered over him, analyzing, dissecting. "Biometrics indicate severe cellular degradation," the scientist murmured. "Standard for prolonged cryo. Exposure revival may not be possible." Dralethian exhaled through his ventral vents, a wasted effort he had expected. The human's fingers twitched. Silence gripped the hangar, then his eyes snapped open. Vashdor recoiled, his carapace plates flaring in alarm. The human's irises were the color of dying embers, sharp with a clarity that had no right to exist after centuries of frozen slumber. His chest rose in a slow, deliberate breath, as if his lungs were remembering the shape of air. And then he spoke. The words were archaic, the language dead. But the tone, it was not the plea of a dying creature. It was the voice of something that had waited. Dralethian's claws flexed. This was not a relic. This was a storm in hibernation. The human's first breath was a rasp, a sound like rusted metal grinding against stone. His fingers curled slow and deliberate, as if testing the weight of existence itself. The cryochamber's frost still clung to his skin, glistening under the harsh orange glow of the Dralethian hangar lights. Vashdor took an involuntary step back, his carapace plates clicking in unease. His scanners had been wrong. The human's vitals weren't degrading. They were adapting. His cells, once brittle from centuries of frozen stasis, were now reforging themselves with a speed that defied biological logic. Dralethian watched, his ventral vents flaring in silent assessment. The human's eyes, those ember, bright irises, scanned the room with a predator's precision. He didn't flinch at the sight of the towering Dralethians, their segmented armor gleaming like molten steel. He didn't recoil from the industrial hum of the ship's plasma cores, their heat signatures pulsing like forge fires. And then he spoke again. The words were archaic. Yes, a dead dialect of a long-lost Earth, but the meaning was unmistakable. "Where is my ship?" Vashdor's mandibles twitched. "His neural activity is unnatural," Dralethian finished. His claws flexed, the sound like shearing metal. The human's lips curled, not a smile, a warning. The hangar bay's overhead lights flickered, a minor power fluctuation, nothing unusual for a Dralethian vessel. But the human's gaze snapped upward, tracking the disturbance before the diagnostics even registered it. His hearing was sharper than it should be. His reflexes, faster centuries in cryo, should have left him weak, broken. Instead, it had honed him. Vashdor's scanners whirred frantically. "Commander, his muscle density is increasing. His synaptic responses are..." Dralethian silenced him with a gesture. He stepped forward, his armored bulk casting a long shadow over the human. "You are aboard the Dralethian, a salvage vessel." The human exhaled, slow and controlled. His breath fogged in the cold air. Salvage. The word was a blade, sharp with implication. Dralethian's instincts flared. This was no mere relic. This was a soldier, a survivor, and he had just realized he was surrounded by scavengers. The human's fingers twitched again, not a spasm. A test. Vashdor's scanners screamed a sudden alert. His adrenaline levels are. The human moved. Not with the sluggishness of a thawed corpse, but with the lethal grace of a predator unshackled. His hand shot out, seizing a discarded maintenance tool from a nearby workbench. The motion was fluid, effortless, as if his body had already mapped every inch of the room before Head even opened his eyes. Dralethian's combat reflexes ignited. His plasma caster hummed to life, its orange-red coils glowing. But the human didn't attack. And then he spoke a third time, his voice a low, deliberate rasp. "You woke the wrong soldier." The lights flickered again. This time they stayed off. In the darkness, something moved. The darkness lasted only a second before the emergency luminescence flickered on. Dim, blood-red strips along the floor, casting long, jagged shadows. But in that second, the human had vanished. Dralethian's armored fingers tightened around his plasma caster, the weapon's core pulsing with molten fury. His thermal vision painted the room in smears of heat. Vashdor's panicked silhouette, the cooling cryopod, the scattered tools, but no trace of the human. Impossible. The chamber was sealed. No vents, no exits. Yet the soldier had dissolved into the dark like smoke. Then, movement, a whisper of displaced air behind him. Dralethian spun, weapon raised. Just as the human's fist slammed into the side of his cranial plating, the impact rang through his skull like a forge. Hammer strike staggering him, his HUD flared with damage alerts, microfractures spiderwebbing through his reinforced exoskeleton. The human wasn't just fast, he was stronger than he should be. Vashdor's voice crackled over the comms, shrill with disbelief. His musculature, it's not degrading. The cryostasis, it didn't preserve him, it enhanced him. Dralethian barely processed the words before the human struck again, this time with the stolen maintenance tool, a crude but brutally efficient pry bar. It arced toward his neck joint, the exact weak point in his armor. He barely dodged. The pry bar glanced off his shoulder pauldron, shearing through the outer plating like foil. Molten sparks sprayed as the human twisted, already resetting for another strike. Dralethian fired. Plasma seared the air. A near miss as the human rolled under the blast, inhumanly fluid. The superheated energy slagged a console behind him, sending molten metal dripping to the floor in glowing threads. The human didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. This time, Dralethian saw it, the way his muscles moved, the eerie precision of a body that had spent centuries frozen, adapting in the stillness. Cryostasis hadn't atrophied him, it had honed him. Every cell, every synapse, had been forced into perfect, desperate efficiency, and now he was awake. The pry bar cracked against Dralethian's wrist joint, jolting his weapon loose. It clattered to the floor, its core still pulsing. The human didn't bother grabbing it. He didn't need it. Vashdor's voice cut through the chaos. Half terrified, half awed. His neural activity, it's not just his body, his brain, the synaptic pathways, they've rewired themselves. Dralethian barely had time to register the implications before the human's boot smashed into his midsection, sending him crashing into a bank of monitors. Glass shattered. Electricity arced. In the strobe of dying screens, the human's face was a ghost-pale mask, eyes too sharp, smile too knowing. "You don't get it," he rasped, stepping forward. "You didn't wake me up." His fingers flexed. "You unleashed me," and then the lights died again. This time, they didn't come back. Somewhere in the dark, something laughed. Section Fey. The weight of dead stars. The darkness didn't just swallow the room. It consumed it. Dralethian's secondary ocular implants flickered online, casting the world in jagged thermal outlines. The human was a searing white silhouette against the cooling metal of the chamber, his heat signature pulsing like a dying star. No organic being should burn that brightly. Vashdor's voice crackled through the comms, distorted by the electromagnetic interference still rippling through the ship systems. Dralethian. His vitals. The commander didn't need the data feed to know. He could feel it. The air itself vibrated with the human's presence, thick with the ozone scent of overclocked neural activity. The human, Tyler Woods, the records had named him, tilted his head. His pupils were blown wide, swallowing the irises, drinking in every photon of light. He moved like a thing unshackled from time, every motion eerily precise, as if his muscles had memorized violence centuries before this moment and never forgotten. Dralethian's weapon lay between them, its molten core still cycling through emergency protocols. He lunged for it. Woods let him. The human's foot slammed down on the barrel, pinning it to the deck. The metal shrieked. Dralethian barely registered the pain in his claws as the weapon's housing crumpled under the force, its containment field rupturing in a spray of orange, red sparks. Woods leaned in, his breath fogged the air between them, too warm, too steady. "You keep looking at me like I'm broken," he murmured. His voice was sandpaper and static, the sound of a throat unused for centuries. "But you're the ones who don't understand what time does to a mind." Behind him, the cryopod's shattered casing glowed faintly in the dark, its readout still scrolling diagnostics. Vashdor had been right. The stasis hadn't preserved Tyler Woods. It had refined him, centuries of frozen silence, and his neurons had rewired, synapses reforging themselves in the endless dark. A human brain wasn't meant to be idle, so it had adapted. Dralethian's secondary heart pounded. The realization hit him like a plasma round. They hadn't awakened a relic. Dead thought a predator. Wood's grin widened. "Let me show you." And then the world moved. The human's fist blurred. Dralethian barely twisted aside in time, feeling the displaced air crack against his cranial plating. The wall behind him buckled, composite alloys crumpling like foil under the force of the blow. Vashdor's shriek of warning came too late. Woods was already pivoting, his elbow slamming into Dralethian's thoracic vents. The commander felt the impact resonate through his exoskeleton, a deep metallic groan of stressed alloys. He staggered. Woods didn't. The human moved like gravity was a suggestion. Every motion impossibly efficient, his body obeying instincts honed in the abyss of cryosleep. He fought like a man who'd spent centuries dreaming of nothing but this moment. Dralethian's claws scraped against the deck as he caught himself. His systems screamed warnings. Joint integrity compromised, respiratory efficiency dropping. Across the room, Vashdor fumbled with a sidearm, his manipulators trembling. Woods didn't even glance his way. "Don't," he said, soft as a knife sliding between ribs. Vashdor froze. The human's eyes never left Dralethian's. "You wanted to study me," Woods continued. He flexed his fingers, the tendons standing out like cables under his too pale skin. "So let's talk." The lights flickered once, twice. Then the emergency power finally kicked in, bathing the room in a bloody orange glow. In that hellish light, Tyler Woods didn't look human at all. He looked hungry. And Dralethian finally understood. This wasn't a rescue. It was a reckoning. The emergency lights bathed the chamber in molten hues, casting long, jagged shadows that writhed like living things across the segmented bulkheads. The air smelled of scorched metal and something else, something organic, coppery and sharp. Dralethian's secondary heart thrummed in his chest, a rapid, discordant rhythm that sent pulses of heat through his veins. His neural interface flickered with damage reports, microfractures in his exocarapace, stress warnings along his primary limb actuators. None of it mattered. Not now, not with him standing there. Tyler Woods hadn't moved. He didn't need to. Every line of his body spoke of violence held in check. A predator's patience honed over centuries of frozen sleep. His eyes, too bright, too aware, locked onto Dralethian's with an intensity that made the Dralethian commander's plating feel thin as paper. Vashdor had stopped breathing. The scientist's manipulators hovered over the sidearm, trembling, caught between instinct and the human's quiet command. A single word, a death sentence. Woods exhaled, slow and deliberate, his breath fogging in the cold air. His fingers flexed again, the motion too precise, too controlled, like he was testing the limits of his own body after centuries of disuse. Dralethian's tactical subroutines screamed at him to act, to call reinforcements, to trigger the chamber's security protocols. But something primal in his hindbrain kept him still. This wasn't a fight. This was an evaluation. And he was the one being weighed. Woods tilted his head just slightly, as if listening to something none of them could hear. The emergency lighting caught the scars along his jawline, pale ridges of tissue that stood out stark against his skin. Old wounds, very old. "You woke me up," he said at last. His voice was calm, empty. "Why?" Dralethian's vocal modulator crackled. "Study." The word tasted like ash. "Your species was extinct." Woods didn't react, not at first. Then, slowly, so slowly, his lips curled. Not a smile, something darker. "Funny," he murmured. "I was just thinking the same thing about yours." The lights flickered again. Somewhere deep in the ship's infrastructure, a conduit burst, flooding the adjacent corridor with superheated plasma. The distant roar of it echoed through the chamber like a dying beast's final cry. Vashdor flinched. Woods didn't. Dralethian's neural interface pinged, an alert from the bridge. The human warship, the one they dismissed as a derelict, was powering up. Weapons systems cycling online, shields activating. Impossible. Woods' gaze never wavered. "You should have left me sleeping." The deck shuddered beneath them as the first salvo struck the Dralethian vessel's outer hull. Somewhere, alarms began to wail, and Tyler Woods finally moved. Section Fe, the black box paradox. The first impact rocked the Dralethian cruiser like a hammer striking an anvil. Dralethian's neural interface flared with damage reports, breaches along the ventral plating, shield emitters overloading and cascading failure. The human warship, the Indomitable, was no derelict. It was awake, and it was angry. Vashdor stumbled, his copper-plated talons scraping against the deck as the artificial gravity fluctuated. His thermal vents flared orange in distress, pulsing erratic heat signatures across the chamber. The human Woods remained still, not unaffected. Unmoved, Dralethian's secondary ocular implants zoomed in, analyzing the micro-expressions flickering across the human's face. There was no fear there, no hesitation. Only a cold, predatory calculation. The lights dimmed again, plunging the room into a hellish half-light of flickering crimson and the molten glow of emergency conduits. The air smelled of scorched metal and ionized plasma. Woods exhaled, a slow, deliberate breath. Then he shifted. It wasn't the movement of a creature waking from cryostasis. It was the uncoiling of something that had been waiting. Hunting, his muscles flexed beneath the remnants of his tattered uniform, the fabric straining against limbs that should have atrophied after centuries of suspended animation. But they hadn't. Dead. Adapted. Vashdor's data. Pad chimed, a frantic alert from the medical bay. His cranial spines flattened in shock as he processed the readings. The human's cellular structure was rewriting itself in real time, neural pathways reforging at a rate that defied biological logic. The cryo-sleep hadn't preserved him, it had upgraded him. Woods took a step forward. The deck groaned beneath his weight, not from weakness, from pressure. Dralethian's combat protocols screamed at him to act. His plasma caster hummed to life, the weapon's core glowing like a miniature star. He leveled it at Wood's chest. The human didn't stop. "You don't understand what you've woken up," Wood said, his voice low. "Not a threat, a fact. Another impact, closer this time." The Indomitable's railguns were finding their mark. Vashdor's talons trembled as he accessed the ship's internal scans. The human vessel's weapons weren't just active, they were learning, adjusting firing solutions with terrifying efficiency, targeting weak points in the Dralethian armor that shouldn't have been detectable without deep system infiltration. But the humans had always been good at infiltration. Wood's fingers twitched, a reflex, a memory. Somewhere in the depths of the Indomitable systems responded. A silent command, a reactivated protocol. The lights died completely. For 3 heartbeats, there was only darkness and the sound of Dralethian vents hissing in alarm. Then the emergency luminescence flared back to life, and Woods was gone. Vashdor's thermal sensors caught the blur of motion a second too late. The human had crossed the chamber in less time than it took for a Dralethian synapse to fire. Dralethian spun, plasma caster sweeping the shadows, just as the ceiling exploded downward in a rain of shattered plating. Commander Rachel Reynolds dropped into their midst like a falling star, her armored boots cratering the deck. Her visor was cracked, her uniform scorched, but her sidearm was steady, and it was aimed directly at Dralethian's cranial core. "You shouldn't have touched my soldier," she said. Outside, the Indomitable fired again. This time, the hull screamed. Section. Faye. Caretakers lament the Dralethian command chamber had become a killing floor. Vashdor's neural relays burned with delayed comprehension as the human commander materialized from the wreckage of the ceiling, her silhouette haloed in the emergency glow of ruptured conduits. Molten metal dripped from the torn plating above, hissing as it struck the deck, the scent of scorched alloys thick in the recycled air. Dralethian's plasma caster wavered, just for an instant, but it was enough. Reynolds moved. Her sidearm barked once, a kinetic round shearing through the emitter array of Dralethian's weapon before the alien could fire. The Dralethian commander recoiled, his segmented armor plates flaring in reflexive defense. But the human was already pivoting, her boot slamming into his thoracic array with enough force to buckle reinforced alloy. Dralethian crashed into a bank of flickering consoles, orange, red energy cores sputtering as systems overloaded. Vashdor's secondary limbs twitched toward his own sidearm, but something cold and unyielding pressed against the base of his cranial spine. Wood's voice was a rasp, his breath still ragged from cryo. Revival protocols, but the barrel of his scavenged pulse pistol didn't waver. Vashdor's thermal receptors registered the human's elevated core temperature, not from exertion, but from something deeper, something primal. Outside, the Indomitable's bombardment continued, each impact resonating through the Dralethian vessel's superstructure like the tolling of some ancient, wrathful bell. The deck trembled beneath them, conduits bursting in showers of sparks, the industrial brutalism of the alien architecture crumbling under the onslaught. Reynolds didn't spare a glance for the destruction. Her focus remained locked on Dralethian as he struggled to rise, his movements sluggish from the feedback surging through his neural linkages. "You woke him too early," she said, her voice low, each syllable a blade. Dralethian's ocular lenses flickered, his vocal emitter grating with static. "We calculated optimal revival parameters. You butchered them." Reynolds took a step forward, her boot crushing a fractured data slate underfoot. Centuries of suspended adaptation. Neural pathways reforged in the dark, and you ripped him out like he was just another specimen. Vashdor's analytical sub-processes whirred, reassessing the human's vitals, the cryo-signatures, the irregular synaptic flares. Oh, the realization struck him like a plasma burst. They hadn't weakened the humans by thawing them. Dead unleashed them. Wood's grip on the pistol tightened, his knuckles pale beneath the remnants of his cryo suit. The Dralethian scientist could feel the humans pulse through the weapon's grip, a steady, terrifying rhythm. Anticipation. Reynolds' gaze never left Dralethian. You wanted to see what we were capable of. She gestured to the shuddering viewports, where the Indomitable's silhouette loomed against the void, its weapon arrays glowing like the eyes of some awakened Leviathan. Congratulations! You just became part of the experiment. The ship fired again. This time, the lights didn't come back. Section Fae. The last transmission darkness swallowed the Dralethian command hub. Not the soft, yielding dark of a power failure. This was absolute. The kind of dark that pressed against ocular membranes like a physical weight. The kind that made even Dralethian heat, sensitive pupils strain uselessly. Emergency luminescence from the ship's molten core conduits usually provided a dim copper glow, but now even those were dead. Only the faint, dying embers of ruptured plasma conduits painted the walls in fleeting strokes of burnt orange, like the last breaths of a dying star. Dralethian's claws scraped against the command console as he steadied himself. The Indomitable's last strike hadn't just severed power. It had surgically crippled their energy grid, bypassing redundancies like they were mere suggestions. His secondary heart thrummed in a staccato rhythm, a biological alarm system screaming at him to move. But where? The humans had turned his ship into a tomb, its corridors now a maze of dead systems and lurking threats. Across the ruined bridge, Vashdor's neural interface flickered weakly, casting jagged shadows across his segmented face. His mandibles twitched as he parsed the damage reports scrolling across his retinal display. Secondary reactors offline, tertiary, a pause. Gone. The humans didn't just target our weapons, they knew. His voice was a rasp of static, the vocal modulators damaged. They mapped our entire grid from the inside. Dralethian's frill spines flattened against his skull. Of course they had. The humans hadn't just woken up, they'd adapted. While the Dralethians had studied them as static specimens, the humans had been learning, absorbing. Every scan, every probe, every arrogant assumption fed back into their neural networks like data streams. And now they were hunting. A new light flared in the dark. Not Dralethian, not the harsh, industrial glare of plasma, but something colder, blue. White, the glow of human holographics. It emanated from the central display, now commandeered by an external signal. The screen fizzed, then resolved into the gaunt battle-worn face of Commander Reynolds. Her image was grainy, distorted by the Indomitable's jamming fields, but her eyes were unmistakable, sharp, calculating, utterly devoid of mercy. High Commander Dralethian. Her voice was calm, almost conversational, as if she weren't addressing him from the heart of a warship poised to reduce his vessel to molten slag. You've been analyzing us since we woke. Let me return the favor. The display split. On one side, Reynolds, on the other, schematics, Dralethian schematics. Their ship, their weaknesses, every conduit, every shield generator, every escape pod bay highlighted in damning crimson. Vashdor made a sound like a failing engine. That's impossible. We purge our databases every cycle. Terriers, no way they could have. They didn't steal it. Dralethian's voice was hollow. They inferred it. Reynolds smiled. Not a predator's smile, something worse. The smile of a scientist observing confirmed results. Human brains are pattern, recognition engines. Vashdor, you scanned us enough times to give us a map of your own systems. Every energy signature, every thermal bloom, you showed us exactly how you work. A pause, and how to break you. The transmission flickered again. Now it showed Sergeant Woods, standing amidst a ruin of shattered cryo pods and sparking Dralethian drones. His hands were bare, no weapon in sight. He didn't need one. The way he moved, fluid, effortless, made it clear the enhancements weren't just physical. His neural pathways had rewired in cryo sleep, turning him into something beyond baseline human, beyond predictable. Woods tilted his head, studying the feed as if he could see them through the static. "You woke us up," he said, voice eerily calm. "But you didn't ask how we got in those pods." The screen cut to black. Then, a final message scrolled across, translated into jagged Dralethian script. "We volunteered. The Indomitable fired." The Indomitable's first salvo tore through the Dralethian fleet, like a blade through wet parchment. Draltel's command throne shuddered beneath him as the Stormforged reeled from the impact, its reinforced armor buckling under the sheer kinetic force of the human railguns. The projectiles weren't just fast, they were relentless, each impact sending molten shrapnel spiraling through the lower decks. Alarms wailed in dissonant harmony, their orange, red emergency lights painting the bridge in the color of fresh blood. Vashdor's claws dug into the console, his neural interface flickering as he tried to parse the data flooding in. The humans hadn't just fired, they had targeted. Every shot struck with surgical precision, bypassing shield nodes, crippling engine clusters, severing communication relays. The realization curdled in Draltel's gut. The humans hadn't just studied their technology. They had learned it, absorbed it, and now wielded its weaknesses like a surgeon's scalpel. A secondary explosion rocked the Stormforged, and the main display flickered, revealing a new horror. The Indomitable wasn't alone. Dozens of smaller vessels, human dropships, sleek and predatory, speared through the debris field, their thrusters flaring like dying stars. They moved with eerie synchronicity, weaving between the wreckage of Dralethian cruisers, as if the battlefield were nothing more than a training exercise. And then the boarding pod struck. The first impact sent tremors through the Stormforged hull, the sound of rending metal echoing through the corridors like a death knell. The second was worse. By the third, Draltel could hear the screams. His warriors were dying. Not in honorable combat. Not in the searing crucible of plasma and steel that defined Dralethian warfare. But in the dark, in the narrow corridors where their bulk meant nothing. Where the humans moved like ghosts, Vashdor's voice was a rasp. There inside. Draltel didn't need the confirmation. He could feel it. The shift in the ship's vibrations, the way the air tasted suddenly wrong, charged with ozone and something else, something human. The bridge doors hissed open. Sergeant Tyler Woods stepped through, his boots leaving faint imprints in the scorched deck plating. He wasn't armored. He wasn't even armed. He didn't need to be. Wood's eyes, too sharp, too aware, locked onto Draltel. The enhancements weren't just physical. The cryo-sleep had done something to his mind, rewired his neural pathways until every movement, every breath, was calculated. Predatory. "You should have left us sleeping," Woods said, his voice quiet, almost regretful. Behind him, the corridor flickered with muzzle flashes. Screams cut short. Draltel's warriors charged. Woods moved. It wasn't speed. Not exactly. It was efficiency. Every motion flowed into the next, a seamless dance of violence. A Dralethian swung a plasma glaive. Woods sidestepped, gripped the warrior's wrist, and twisted. Bone shattered. The glaive fell. Woods caught it midair and drove it through another warrior's chest before the body had even hit the ground. Vashdor lunged, his neural interface flaring as he activated a shock pulse from his implants. Woods didn't flinch. He caught the energy discharge in his palm, fingers closing around the crackling current as if it were nothing more than an annoyance. Then he pulled. Vashdor screamed as his own systems overloaded, his implants burning white, hot beneath his skin. He collapsed, convulsing, his body a puppet with its strings cut. Woods turned back to Draltel, The Dralethian commander rose from his throne, his armor humming with latent energy. He had fought 1,000 battles. He had burned worlds. This was different. Woods tilted his head, studying him. "You're afraid," he observed. "Good." Then the Indomitable fired again, and the Stormforged died. The Stormforged burned. Molten metal dripped from its ruptured hull like bleeding wounds. The once imposing fortress of dark angular plating, now a shattered carcass adrift in the void. The Indomitable's final salvo had torn through its industrial-grade shielding as if it were paper, the human railguns firing with such precision that entire sections of the Dralethian flagship had simply ceased to exist. Inside the wreckage, Dralethian staggered through the smoke-filled corridors, his armor's orange, red energy cores flickering erratically. The air stank of scorched alloy and ionized plasma, the remnants of his once proud vessel now a tomb for his warriors. His claws dug into the wall for support, the segmented plating beneath his fingers warped from the heat of the bombardment. He had seen war, true war, the kind that scorched atmospheres and left civilizations as smoldering ruins. But this was something else. This was reckoning. Ahead, the reinforced doors to the command nexus hissed open, their mechanisms damaged but still functional. Inside, the chamber was a graveyard. The bodies of his officers lay slumped over their stations, their neural interfaces still sparking from the feedback of the Indomitable's viral hacks. The main holodisplay flickered weakly, showing the human warship hovering just beyond the debris field, its silhouette a monstrous shadow against the distant stars, and standing before it, waiting for him, was Sergeant Tyler Woods. The human was wrong, not in the way Dralethians measured wrongness, not in asymmetry or flawed design. No, this was something deeper. Woods stood there, still clad in the remnants of his cryo-suit, his body humming with an energy that made the air around him warp. His eyes, too bright, too aware, tracked Dralethian's every movement with predatory precision. "You're still alive," Woods observed. His voice was calm, almost conversational. "I wasn't sure you would be." Dralethian's mandibles flexed. His instincts screamed at him to attack, to crush this insolent creature beneath his claws. But something primal, something buried deep in the oldest layers of his species' memory, held him back. This was not prey. This was hunter. "You are not human," Dralethian rasped, his vocalizer crackling from the damage. "Not anymore." Woods tilted his head, considering. Then, slowly, he smiled. "Neither are you." The words struck deeper than any blade. Dralethian had spent centuries refining himself into the perfect weapon, his body augmented, his mind honed by war. But this was something beyond augmentation. This was evolution. Wood stepped forward, his boots crunching over shattered glass. "You wanted to study us," he said, "to see what made humans weak, but you never asked the right question." Dralethian's claws twitched. "And what question is that?" Wood's smile didn't waver. "What makes us strong?" Outside, the Indomitable's engines flared, its massive frame turning toward the remains of the Dralethian fleet. And then, with a silence that was worse than any roar, it fired. Section Fe. The answering silence, the void between stars, had never felt so heavy. Dralethian's remaining eye flickered, its mechanical iris struggling to focus as the Indomitable's weapons carved through the remnants of his fleet. There was no grand explosion, no triumphant war cry, just the cold, methodical annihilation of ships that had once been the pride of the Dralethian Empire. One by one, their molten orange reactors flared and died, their segmented hulls buckling under the weight of human firepower. It was not a battle. It was an execution. Vashdor's voice crackled over the ruined comms, distorted by static and something deeper. "Dread. High Commander, we cannot." Dralethian did not answer. His claws dug into the fractured console before him, the dark metal groaning under the pressure. He had known war. He had known defeat. But this was something else. This was inevitability. Across the ruined bridge, Wood stood motionless, his gaze locked on the view screen. The human's breathing was steady, his pulse, when Dralethian's damaged sensors could pick it up, unnervingly calm. There was no gloating in his expression, no savage joy at the destruction unfolding outside. Only quiet certainty, this is what we do. The thought slithered through Dralethian's mind like a blade between ribs. Humans had always been creatures of extremes, reckless in their fury, relentless in their endurance. But this was something older, something that had slept in their bones long before they ever reached the stars. Woods turned his head slightly, just enough to meet Dralethian's gaze. "You thought we were weak because we felt," he said, his voice low. "Because we grieved, because we remembered." A pause. The hum of the Indomitable's engines vibrated through the deck. "But that's what you never understood." Outside, the last Dralethian cruiser shuddered, its angular form collapsing inward as the human railguns punched through its core. For a heartbeat, its molten energy conduits blazed like a dying star, then winked out. Not the silence of surrender, the silence of judgment. Dralethian's mandibles twitched, his body aching with the weight of realization. The Dralethian Empire had spent millennia perfecting war. They had forged themselves in fire, honed their bodies into weapons, their minds into strategies. But humans had bred war into their blood. And now, after centuries of sleep, it had woken up hungry. Woods took a step forward, the dim emergency lights casting long shadows across his face. "Your mistake," he said, "was thinking we'd fight like you." Somewhere deep in the ship, a klaxon wailed, a final futile warning. Dralethian exhaled. His systems flickering, he had no words left, no strategies, only the bitter taste of understanding. The humans had not come to negotiate, they had come to answer, and the answer was silence. Section Fe. When Hello meets infinity, the Dralethian warship Molten Vengeance hung broken in the void, its once proud angular hull now a shattered carcass bleeding orange plasma into the dark. The humans had not just defeated them, they had dismantled them. Dralethian's remaining ocular sensors flickered, struggling to process the devastation. His body, once a masterpiece of Dralethian engineering, was now a ruin of scorched plating and failing neural relays. The air smelled of ionized metal and burning coolant, the scent of a war machine gutted from within. Across the ruined command deck, Sergeant Tyler Woods stood amidst the wreckage, his breathing steady, his stance relaxed. The human's eyes, so unnervingly alive, locked onto Dralethian's. There was no gloating there, no triumph, only the quiet certainty of a predator who had never doubted the outcome. Vashdor's voice crackled weakly through Dralethian's failing comms. "High Commander, the core breaches. We cannot." Dralethian silenced him with a thought. He already knew the humans had not simply boarded them, they had infested them. Their drones had slithered through maintenance shafts like mechanical parasites, their hacking protocols dissolving Dralethian firewalls like acid. Their weapons had not just pierced armor, they had unmade it. Molecular bonds unraveling under the kiss of human, made entropy fields. And now, as the Molten Vengeance shuddered in its death throes, Dralethian understood the true horror. Humans did not fight for conquest, they fought for closure. Woods took another step forward, the deck groaning beneath his boots. The emergency lights painted his face in bloody hues, casting his shadow long and jagged across the fractured walls. "You thought we were relics," he said, voice low. "Fossils. Something to be studied, catalogued, controlled." Dralethian's mandibles twitched. He had no answer. Woods tilted his head, as if listening to something only he could hear. Then, softly, "But you woke us up." Somewhere deep in the ship, a final containment field failed. The air trembled with the groan of dying metal. Dralethian's systems spat warnings, core collapse imminent. He had seconds left. And yet, in those final moments, He saw it. The humans had not been sleeping. They had been waiting. Woods turned away, stepping back into the shadows as the first tongues of plasma erupted through the deck. The last thing Dralethian heard was not the roar of the explosion. It was the whisper of a human voice, carried on dying comms, Commander Reynolds, speaking not to him, but to the stars themselves. Transmission sent. They'll know we're awake now. Not the silence of death. The silence of a door finally closing. And somewhere, in the endless dark between stars, 1,000 human cryo pods began to hum. The silence did not last. Deep in the void, where the wreckage of the Dralethian fury spun in slow, molten spirals, something else stirred. A signal pulsed outward, not a distress call, not a warning, but a beacon. It traveled faster than light, skipping across dimensions human science had once only theorized about. It reached its destination in moments, and the stars answered. 1,000 dormant ships, scattered across dead systems and drifting in the graveyards of forgotten wars, flickered to life. Their reactors, cold for centuries, flared with sudden, hungry light. Cryo. Pods hissed open, frost evaporating into the stale air as armored figures rose from their long slumber. They had waited in the dark. They had slept through the death of their empire, through the slow decay of time itself. They had let the galaxy forget them. Now they remembered. On the bridge of a derelict dreadnought, a single screen flickered to life. A face appeared, pale, scarred, eyes sharp with the weight of centuries. Commander Reynolds' voice, recorded long ago, played through the rusted speakers. If you're hearing this, it means they found us. It means we're out of time. A pause. Then, quieter. Wake the others. Across the black, engines roared back to life. Weapons, systems cycled online, ancient targeting arrays locking onto distant Dralethian signatures. The humans had not run, they had not hidden. They had buried themselves, waiting patient, until the moment their enemies grew arrogant enough to think them weak. And now, as the first human warships tore free from their asteroid tombs, as their guns turned toward the heart of Dralethian space, the galaxy would learn the truth. Humanity had never surrendered. They had simply been biding their time.